Hi folks, here with Tacitus today at your Pushback channel, and thank you for joining this audio live stream. In this essay, I'd like to talk about how there's a new sort of frontier or new battlefront that's opened up against all those who oppose or question globalization, and it's a new sort of frontier of lawfare. Now, lawfare has always existed, but it's the organised and structural nature of this new form of lawfare. Now, we've got over the last 10 years, the globalists or the Western governments they control have been astonishingly successful. I mean, successful beyond their wildest dreams, I think, of installing activist DAs, activist public prosecutors, activist attorneys general, activist district attorneys, activist judges, activists throughout the entire legal system, so they can bring frivolous harassment lawsuits against, what they would generically term Nazis. They can bring these lawsuits against people, and they've got the media on their side as well, of course, against people or groups or organizations or clubs or whatever. They can bring harassment lawsuits on just a continual basis, like they're harassing Donald Trump at the moment, that same sort of thing. Now, it's different. Donald Trump is a wealthy man, and if you're going to take him on, you're not going to be able to bankrupt him. So they just have to engage in constant harassment. But with other people who've got limited resources, then it's not that hard to bankrupt them through harassment lawfare. And we should be under no illusion here. This is very well organised. It's very well targeted. There's a downtown central planning bureau that's looking at any group now. Who can we crush today? And using disingenuously, of course, but using the law to go after people on managing to transform sort of minor misdemeanors into criminal proceedings and things like that. So, and they've got again entire taxpayer-funded attorney generals and Department of Prosecutions, Department of Justice, all on side, all helping them, all doing everything they can to facilitate, and of course activist judges, and as we've seen in New York, the ability to stack, or even in Georgia, the ability to stack grand juries with activists, and they can do all this with impunity. No one's being held to account for it. It's an outrageous travesty of justice and a stunning corruption of the process. But they're doing it and getting away with it, and scoring many prosecutions and many fines as a result. So now there's a second or next layer to this, which is the massive an army of NGOs that are superbly well funded, whether it's by the United Nations or George Soros or any other group that shovels money into them. But these NGOs have vast resources to fund and finance these lawfare lawsuits. So litigants who don't have anywhere near the financial resources to go out and aggressively pester and harass another group, they don't have the resource to do it, so they just wouldn't. They're not only being encouraged to do it and set up to do it, but they're being given all the financial and legal resources. So there's a ready-made, here's the money, we'll pay for everything, here's the lawyers, you need to do nothing but turn up in court in the day we tell you to, here's your script when you turn up. So so they orchestrate and stage manage the whole lot. So these NGOs finance the thing, and again provide the lawyers and all the other bits and pieces. They're also given inside information by the very corrupt and very partisan district attorneys and so on. They're able to impanel activist juries. They're able to guarantee, we'll guarantee we'll get you an activist judge, and so on. So this is like a three-pronged network. The NGOs, the entire administration of justice, and then the prearranged jurists, the judges, are also on side with this. So they can pretty much guarantee a prosecution. So they can drag someone in front of through these sort of kangaroo courts. So I think they're even worse than the Chinese communist people's street courts that they used to. I think it's even worse than that. But I think that's how bad things are right now in the West. So, and again, the globalists have to have this sort of power if they're going to implement the globalist project. So it's kind of a natural extension of the power they see they need to force the globalization project on a population that doesn't want it, and where the outcome is so bad that the globalists can't sell it. They can only crush the dissent, but they can't bring the people with them. So this is this lawfare, this harassment lawfare, is part of that wider project. But I was listening to this is one supposedly non-partisan NGO. This is non-partisan, they claim themselves to be. So they're an NGO, so they have effectively charity status. So you can donate money to them and it's a tax deduction. And they don't have to pay tax on their income. So now they're claim to be non-partisan, but there's nothing on their website that's even remotely non-partisan. I'll just sort of take you to this because it's an interesting sort of thing. Now, this is a claim to be independent. They claim to research extremism. That's their role. They do it impartially and independently, so they claim, and are generously funded. But the exact opposite is the reality, in my view. We have got a number of legal victories against Nazis, white supremacists, hate groups, murderous hate groups, killers, and we're fighting them, we're beating them, those damn fucking Nazis, Hitler. So they've managed to drag a number of people that they say are Nazis into court on the most spurious misdemeanor charges. They've managed to get the Department of Prosecutions to go along with it. The judge that should have thrown these cases out for the harassment bullshit they were, instead was an activist, and they're able to, in the court hearings, they're able to say, well, even though Billy Bob actually didn't do anything wrong or has no association with the Nazis, we've got a photograph here where he was in the same cocktail lounge as a member of the Proud Boys 5 years ago. We say the Proud Boys is a Nazi group. We don't have to prove it or anything. We just can say it. And this person was in the same room, even though there were 100 other people in the same room as a group who we say is Nazi, but we don't have to prove they're Nazi. So this person was in that same room with Nazis. We don't have to prove that person is Nazi. We can just assert it. So now, Nazi, that's it. Hey, Nazi, and hey, convict them. And they're able to, it's looking at, they actually put some of their legal documents online. And again, it's the same thing as you see all around the place. This is done by a first-year law student. It's sloppy, piss-poor fucking work. Now, this is coming from someone who I've had to prepare court documents and many times. So I know the level of exactitude you have to meet if you've got an independent judge, if you've got a judge that's going to make a decision on the evidence and the facts. Now, sloppy work like this, where you can just make vague inferences, proves beyond doubt that the judge is an activist and an ideological activist. So if you want to call someone a Nazi, fine with me, they're Nazis. And that's the level. So the burden of proof is put against so if you're accused of being a Nazi, you then carry the entire burden of proof. That's the standard in these courts. Now, we should all be shivering and shaking with fear and concern over this. Politicians should be really jumping all over this, expelling these judges from the courts and ensuring that activist judges can't hear cases like this, and to now I've been in a number of situations in court. This is in business and contract law, by the way, but I've been in a number of situations in court where one side's trying it on. They're trying to sort of bring a very unique and very creative interpretation of some legal clause, and use that to sort of piggyback into court to try and exploit some other area of the law. And there's some very imaginative lawyers out there, by the way. But my experience was that they had a real struggle getting it past the judge. These weren't criminal cases or anything, so there wasn't wasn't a jury or something. But they had a lot of trouble getting it past the judge. The judge would say, no, I'm not going to hear this case. This is rubbish. No, I'm throwing it out. Or the judge would say, all right, then, well, look, I'm not happy about this case, but I'll hear it. But you need to give me some really good evidence and quickly, otherwise I'll throw it out. So the guys who are trying it on are given 10 minutes to try and wave the evidence around, but they don't get anywhere. It's all bullshit and it's obvious and very tenuous. A huge stretch, and the judge just throws it out. Just won't listen to it. Or cuts it short. Okay, is that the essence of your evidence? Do you have anything more of substance? No. Okay, I'll hear from the other side now. And then an hour or so later, you've got your judgment on a case. So I found, or my observation rather, was that the creative lawyers who tried to get creative stuff into court had a real problem getting, either it was thrown out or it was knocked on the head in an hour or so. Not that some of them didn't try. I mean, if their client was paying them enough, they were duty bound to have a go, I suppose. But they had a real trouble with it. And also when it came to a jury, the standard of evidence then jumped up pretty quickly, so that you really had to make your case. Whereas if it's judge only, you've got a little bit more latitude to argue very technical aspects of the law, whereas with a jury, not quite so much. But anyway, so when I see cases like the documentation I look through here, then it's quite obvious that the standard of evidence is very low. One side is able to bring a case on the I mean, barely an allegation, some remote, vague, esoteric guilt by association is enough to bring something into court. Now, these activists claim this is a great victory for democracy, and it's a great victory because we're fighting Nazis. But the reality is, it's one of the darkest days that I can think of, and certainly in that courtroom and in jurisprudence generally, where this sort of thing, blatantly, brazenly activist lawfare can be brought into court, and these people can get convictions to harass private citizens who've committed no crime. Now, they're also able to gin up the thing here. Like, for example, Charlottesville as a case in point is getting mentioned. Very vague here. They're just saying, well, white supremacists, Nazis came, murderous, genocidal. And they seem to, what murders, what genocide occurred? So they've got this dramatic, ginned up sort of prose that they're throwing around here. Notorious white supremacist hate group, Nazis. What groups? What groups are you talking about here? What people? We have to remember the Ku Klux Klan from 1910 or so. What are you talking about? 1910? That's over 100 years ago. What's that got to do with anything? We can't forget what the Nazis did in Europe. Well, wait a minute. That was 80 years ago. What are you talking about? This is USA sort of right now. What do you mean? What's all these references to points in history? And we can't forget the slavery and fuck. Now, none of this stuff should make it in the front door of a court. But as a wider sort of social justice, activist social justice, anti-white narrative, this is gold. This is gold to the globalists, and they love it because that gives them license to go out and attack white people anywhere. The notorious white supremacist leaders hate Nazis. And I don't think there's a paragraph in this entire document that doesn't have white supremacist or neo-Nazi. Now, this group is claiming. Remember, they claim to be non-partisan. This group's claiming that they've bankrupted white private citizens on the basis they have some association with organising anti-globalist protests. That's their only crime that I can. And throughout this whole document, they can't point to a crime that I can see. And if there is one, then the only crime is that they have organised other white people or have been instrumental in some way to organising white people to oppose, well, not even all white people. The person doing the organising is white. I suppose it's enough straight and white. They have some some role in organising protests against Antifa or BLM, for example, and that's enough to call them Nazis. They're just using the word, but they're able to go to court and say, look, we think Billy Bob down the road's a Nazi. We want to drag him into court and legally harass him, bankrupt him, and generally kick his ass around. And then the entire legal establishment, in effect, in that area, including the judge, and so just falls right into line. Go, yep, we'll facilitate that. We'll enable that for you. Go get them. So this is now this group. This group sort of defines violence in sort of quite a unique way, but I think it represents the view that most globalist-funded activists try and push. So they say, okay, Antifa and BLM and black gangs and MS-13 and so on and so on. They are violent. They do concede that, and they concede that violence could be viewed as extremist. So they do concede that. But then they put these rioters in. They say, well, Antifa and BLM typically commit violence against property, which isn't true. I mean, they do they burn things down, that sort of stuff. But they do commit violence against property or businesses, but they don't commit violence against people. That's not true. They do commit violence against people. Their next level is when they do commit violence against people, it's typically blacks killing each other. So it kind of doesn't really matter when blacks kill each other, which is, again, I don't understand that mentality. I see it often. Isn't murder murder, no matter who gets murdered or by whom? It's still murder, isn't it? I mean, shouldn't it be? But to them, it's not. It's not the same category. There's no sort of racial touch to it. So if black people gun each other down in some drug gang street battle, who cares? There's no racial oppression in it. So it's an act of equality. Two black people shoot each other, it's equality. I don't know. To me, it's still murder. But hey, that's only me. So they say that Antifa and BLM, they play down the killings of Antifa, the way Antifa and BLM stop cars in the street, block the road, drag some white guy out and beat the shit out of him. It doesn't really matter. So then if there is any violence committed by Antifa and BLM, and Antifa and BLM, by the way, aren't all black. There's some white activists in there and college kid renter mobs and so on. But so if some black pulls some guy out of a car and some white guy and beat the crap out of him, well, that's not really violence because the black people are only fighting back against oppression, which means it's not really violence when they commit violence. So it's when violence is not violence, when it's got some ideological sort of purpose to it. I don't know. I'm not sure I follow that. But that's the argument. So, however, when you look at white people, the position they take is Christian white Gentiles, and this is very important. The Gentile aspect is very important here, in fact, critical in understanding it. When they talk about white people, white Christians, straight white male Christians, then they say, well, these people are inherently evil. They're sort of Nazis through and through. They're a hate group. They're extremists. They're Nazi. They're Hitler and fascist. They're all of those things. So anything they do is evil. So we have to stop the source of the evil. The source of the evil is Christian straight white males. Therefore, we are doing good whenever we harass those people and bankrupt or destroy or imprison those people. We've performed a service for mankind. So, or the human race. So when these people commit violence or anywhere near violence or have an indirect association with violence, or anything we can gin up and portray as violence, we can then immediately associate that with Nazis and job done. White supremacist, Nazis, fascists, job done. So this group is far from partisan. There's not a partisan bone in their bodies there, but it's interesting at the different way they treat white people. White Christians inherently evil, anything they do evil. Black people, well, yeah, okay, they do commit violence and they burn things down, they murder and they do all that, but it's not really as bad because they're kind of black and they're only fighting back against racism. So let's cut them some slack here. What's a few murders when you're opposing racism? So on the other side, these white people. So what's a few people being thrown in prison on false charges if we're fighting racism? Yeah, it's that attitude. It's very much a sort of a school kid, first year gender studies law student type attitude. Now, the spokesperson for this particular group is a Jewish activist, and pretty much all the lawyers working on it are also Jewish activists. There's a couple of junior black people floating around, I think more for cosmetics than anything else, but it's generously funded by Jewish groups. It's been given, again, charity type status, so they don't have to pay tax and all this sort of thing. They've got a lot of money to throw around, and they specifically target people. Now, here's someone they targeted. Here's a person who, a white person who is supposedly a Nazi. On what grounds they claim this is quite beyond me. They were said to have been seen nearby a group of people who were marching who were alleged to be Nazis, but no evidence has been tendered for that. But again, an assertion, an allegation. When you're in an ideological court, you can make an allegation or an assertion, and as long as it's consistent with the ideology, it'll be accepted as evidence. And then once the allegation is accepted as evidence, the burden of proof just instantly reverses to the accused. Okay, you are a Nazi. Somebody said so. You're prove that you're not a Nazi. Prove that you're not Hitler's best buddy. But Hitler died, 80 years ago. That doesn't matter. Prove that Hitler died. Is Hitler here in the room? Can you produce Hitler's dead body right now? You can't, can you? Which means you're a fucking Nazi and you're Hitler's best. So that's the level of evidence and how they work in these ideological courts. They reverse the burden of proofs, then impose crazy requirements where you must meet an unbelievably high burden of proof to disprove the assertion that's unproven, that is used against you in order to reverse the burden of proof. So, you could go both ways. You can say, well, you say Billy Bob's a Nazi. What proof do you have of that? Can you show that to the court? And they can't. They wouldn't be able to. So if they were placed under the same burden of proof as the other side, then the case wouldn't get anywhere. But they're not. They're given an incredibly low burden of proof to meet, whereas the other side has a very high burden of proof. So this group claims that they've brought 20 lawsuits and they've won 20 of them. Now imagine how much corruption is required of the legal system for them to succeed to that extent. Just imagine it, and. Again, I'm just looking at. I'm reading some of the stuff off the website now. It's insane. These people are fucking insane that they would trumpet and claim this is a great victory. We tore down the entire legal system. We've trashed rule of law. We've trashed evidence. We've turned the court into an ideological toy that we can play with. That's a great victory. Is it? Is it? You calling that a victory? Holy fuck! Now, the thing that really sort of sticks in my craw is this particular. Activist group it's almost a completely Jewish activist gig, and their relationship they draw with, they're almost recounting the genocide in Europe in the late 1930s and early 1940s. They're sort of drawing a direct parallel with that anybody who opposes globalization is a Nazi, and anyone who's a Nazi is one of the mass murderers from 1930s, 1940s Europe. The murders from 1930s, 1940s Europe were Nazis. Therefore, this person is. So they've got this, which is a very Jewish way of looking at things. Now, the Jews have taught themselves to understandably, by the way, Jews have taught themselves to be acutely sensitive to any shifts in the social discourse or social organization. So if they see the slightest smidgen of what they would see as something that may ultimately lead to an anti-Jewish movement, then they're super and acutely sensitive to that. Now they perceive white Gentiles, Christians, and any form of nationalism and group identity, they perceive that as a direct and present threat and danger to the Jews. Therefore, they will be fanatical in their pursuit of attempting to break that up. And we see that today all across the West, and particularly in the United States. Now, it's not necessarily that justification, but I think they've become so jumpy and so acute that they're seeing shadows of the shadows. They're jumping at anything now. If somebody looks at the American flag and says, "Well, I'm proud of my flag," Nazi, 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 and they're going on some insane sort of mission now that we've got to bring the Nazis down. Nazis everywhere. And so now to create, as the Jews would see, an equal society, where anybody can sort of disappear into the wider fabric of society unnoticed with no difference from anyone else, then things like, the drag queen story, our LGBTQ, affirmative action, black lesbians as CEOs, all that sort of thing in the wider churn and burn sort of method of reordering society. This is how the Jews would see, well, once we get that sort of society happening, then we too will blend in. We too will be anybody within the anybody within the wider sort of morass of humanity and the miasma of humanity. We'll just blend in there as no different from anyone else. I don't think that'll work. I think they're very misguided in that position. But that seems, so if we destabilize Christian white society to a point where it has no cohesion whatsoever, then we will never be oppressed again. That's their sort of take on things. And I think they've misread it, and I think they're fighting the demons of generations and times in history, which is what they're taught in schools, to never forget the oppression of the Jews, whether it's the Russian pogroms or the Nazi business or indeed other expulsions of the Jews over time, whether it's been in the merchant city-states of Italy or indeed elsewhere. What a lot of people don't know is when King Richard the Lionheart was imprisoned in I don't know, 1290, whatever it was, coming back from the Crusades. I think he was in Austria. He was in prison, and the Austrians wanted a ransom. So they wanted some serious money, and the English crown couldn't afford it at the time, and they'd already been funding the Crusades, and they were sort of kind of bankrupt. So they had to turn to the moneylenders and to get to raise the cash to pay the ransom for King Richard, and they had to turn to Jewish moneylenders. So the Jewish said, "Well, we'll give you the bucks and negotiating interest rates, that sort of stuff, but you have to allow us to own land in, bear in mind, agricultural society in the time. You have to give us the right to own land, legally protected deeds of ownership in England, if you want us to pony up the cash." So it was agreed to on that basis, and the ransom was paid. And Richard Coeur de Lion came back from Austria or where he was imprisoned, and that was how Jews were able to own land in England. Now, this is something that's taught in Jewish schools, along with the whole Jewish history thing. So what we see when we look at these Jewish activists in this supposed non-partisan group, we see that their focus is on achieving, and they see this as one of the best opportunities they've ever had in history of achieving the total destruction of white Gentile Christian social cohesion. That this is their big chance. So this is what they're pursuing, and they can't separate the events today from the events of 100 or 500 or 1,000 or more than 1,000 years ago. They're dreaming of the Romans and Masada and all this sort of stuff. So we see very. So I see that this activism, this Jewish activism, is in that. Now, no one's holding this NGO to account. They're in my view, that they should be accountable in the sense of, look, your mission here is to destroy the rule of law, to destroy due legal process, to put corrupt judges to conspire with a corrupt judge and corrupt organs of law, law enforcement and so on, to actively, aggressively, and with great determination corrupt the legal process, just so you can play out your fantasies of social re-engineering. And that should be, these people should, in my view, should face charges and should be, if found guilty in a properly adjudicated court of law, should go to prison, in my view. So when we look at the wider architecture of this and the activist nature of it, then I've got cause for concern. Yet there's another cause for concern I have. It was only 70, 80 years ago in Central Europe where the Nazis, probably from 1936, 1937 onwards in particular, they targeted Jews by denying them due legal process and by having two systems of justice. So any Gentile could accuse any Jew of some sort of a crime, and for example, staring at a Gentile could be seen as a crime. Interesting how that law's been reinvented now across the Western world, but used against straight white males. Interesting, that, isn't it? Anyway, so for example, among other things, but staring at a Gentile could be enough to make a complaint. So you go into the local police station or court and make a complaint that Billy Bob Steinberg looked at me and that would be enough to have the Jewish guy summoned into court. Now, the Gentile didn't have to prove it; they just had to allege it. That was enough, and then the burden of proof switched to the Jewish guy, who had to prove that he didn't do it. But they used all sorts of chicanery, as indeed this NGO does, colluding with activist judges and the like. They use various chicanery of moving the court to another area, moving it from one town to the next, or changing the date at the last minute, or refusing to allow the Jewish guy's witnesses to give evidence, and so on. Obviously attempts to undermine the Jewish guy, not allowing the Jewish guy to even speak in his own defence. If the Jewish guy gave proof that he actually wasn't in the town at the time, so couldn't have committed this offence anyway, then the court would conveniently lose those documents or lose those depositions or lose those receipts of evidence. So when the hearing came up, no, we haven't got any evidence, but I deposited yesterday. Go, no, we haven't got any. You're lying. You damn liar. And so the same tactics that these Jewish activist groups are using today, or this activist group is using today, and then crowing about what a great achievement it is. But we need to come to grips with reality here that why have these Jews not learned from history? They're quite happy with a corrupt legal system, provided it's not directed against them. Fuck me. Why can you not learn from history? To me, that time in those Nazi courts to pursue and persecute Jews, that was a travesty of justice on a grand scale. And if the rule of law had been applied, as in the rule of law equally to all citizens, and if the the due legal process and the rules of evidence have been applied to, the Nazis had a very difficult time persecuting the Jews. But the whole point is we want to persecute, therefore we'll just remove the legal obstacles to us performing this persecution. And it's one of the most terrible travesties that I've seen in modern history. Not that it hadn't happened in China and Cambodia and the Soviet Union and so on, but we're seeing it happening again. And the people at the forefront of this aren't the Nazis, and they're the Jews. Jews are at the forefront of this today, I would argue, in my opinion, in America, at the forefront and elsewhere, at the forefront of this. I mean, why have you not learned from history? Shouldn't every Jewish lawyer, legal practitioner, judge, and so on be committed with rabid determination to upholding the rule of law, upholding due legal process, upholding the rules of evidence? Because then we're all protected by that. A tyrannical state can never come after you if they have to go through a fully functioning legal system at first. But instead, the Jews are actively tearing it down and have learned nothing from history. And again, they're the view that, as I understand it, as I perceive it, they're the view that as long as the corrupt law is directed against Gentiles, then we're all good. We're all good to go. But what if this corruption would swing back the other way and directly target Jews? They'd be screaming from the rooftops about anti-Semitism. You've been with Tacitus today, your Pushback channel, and thank you for listening.